Hi, I'm Patric Palm, CEO and founder of Favro, and this is the Learn from Leaders podcast. The background to this show is that Favro customers are some of the most innovative companies in the world. Enterprises wanting to be more agile, software as a service companies scaling fast, and game developers and publishers wanting to master live ops. So we get to know some truly inspiring leaders in product development, marketing, operations, sales, executive management. And what we do here is that we interview them about leadership so we can all learn from them. Let's go. So hello everyone, we are live with Kasper from Copenhagen. You're in Copenhagen right now, right?
I am, yeah. I'm at Flashbulb in Copenhagen, yes.
Fantastic. And I'm actually we have a very ambitious title today. It is Learnings from Creating World-Leading Products, Excellence and Culture. That's no small feat to discuss. But what I think we need to do, for the audience here that doesn't know you, is that if we just have a bit of the story, how you got into game development in the way that you do today, because you've been going from film through software to there's so many cool things you've done, and you've been involved in so many absolutely world leading products. So I think this conversation will make so much more sense for everyone if we just get that just a bit of a story on how you got started in the creative industry and your road to what you do now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to try and summarize, the last 10 years in a 5-minute catch-up. So I graduated from the animation workshop in Viborg in Denmark, where I graduated with a computer graphic artist bachelor degree. And immediately when I was done, actually I wasn't an artist from the beginning at all. I was very bad at drawing even, but I just played a lot of computer games, and I really wanted to become making something with computer graphics. And one day I was just reading the newspaper, and then I heard about this school, and I just applied, and they said no. And then after a year of steady drawing, I actually got in. And to summarize that really quick, 3 years later, I had 2 portfolios, one that was for compositing and one that was for technical directing. And I kind of just rolled the dice, and then I sent out both of those showreels, and the first one that came back, I was just going to take the internship with. And I was lucky enough to get into MPC in London. It's the moving picture company. It was really weird because they were known for having done the Harry Potter franchise, and I really wanted to get in. They were quite huge, and it was a huge thing. We were lucky enough to be 2 of us in my old class who got in, and it turned out that the project that they put me on was this crazy project. They all said yeah, we don't quite know. It's the next Marvel film. It looks a little bit weird, and it turned out to be Guardians of the Galaxy. And I was just like, okay. And I didn't know that when I was working on it, because we're just seeing these little snippets of the film, and it was really weird. And yeah, so that was the whole beginning. And just sitting with people like that that are so talented, brings you to a very high motivational level. So I worked a lot, but eventually I wanted to broaden out a little bit and learn a little bit more. So I went into commercials, where I spent the next 2 years in the MPC commercials. So I stayed in the same company, but they had a commercial department, and I stayed there. And then eventually, as I started out by saying, I'm a huge nerd, and I always played a lot of the Blizzard franchises, millions and millions of people. So when I heard that Lucasfilm in Singapore was making World of Warcraft, I was just getting on, and I just made a portfolio just for Lucasfilm. And crazy enough, they actually replied, and 2 months later, I started at Lucasfilm in Singapore, and then I went down there. And then if I summarize really quick, I went back again because I'm close with my family, and living in Singapore is a little bit time zone-wise hard compared to Scandinavia. So I wanted to be back in London. And then I started to freelance, and because I was early on and I had gotten the experience to build my own pipeline, and slowly I just ramped up, and there was more demand that I could follow. So I just started hiring people, and also did a little bit of tutorialization and tried to become, got some views, and people started to notice, and that gave me more jobs. And then I just quit freelancing and just had my own little company, and I moved it back to Copenhagen, started hiring a few people. Again, I think there's a lot of learning when you start a company when you're 25, and I think you also know about that, Patrick. It's there's some things, and eventually I just wanted to not have a company on my own, and I just needed to sit back and figure out what I want to do now. And because I've met so many people, that happens when you have a company, that kind of just drove me into producing. And then eventually I was just offered a role as a producer in Copenhagen, and 3 years later I've been a producer for Flashbulb now for the last 1 year, and then I started as a producer for games for 3 years ago. Before that it was film, then commercials, then just asset handling. So I've taken all the way back and at the same time, all through that, I studied an MBA, so I could get the full circle. So my goal was really just to understand everything there is to learn about creative industries, from both the art side with my degree in arts, and then to my MBA in leadership, and then business economics that I'm also studying. So I'm doing like the full circle, which obviously makes a producer that can be in a lot of different conversations. I think that's the shortest I can do it. Sorry about that.
No, that's awesome. I think everyone has also kind of got the impression that when you set yourself to something, you really pursue it. You probably have your biggest victories in front of you. So hopefully, we have another of these talks, in the future. We can talk about things then. But can you, because Flashbulb has been having some success, but I would argue that it's not a household name, within the industry. So maybe you can just briefly tell a bit on the kind of games you make and the success you had.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're right now producing two games that are successfully out there. One is actually very popular in China. The other one is doing really well in America. One is called Trailmaker. That's the American one. It's an explorer game where you build your own vehicle, whether that's a flying machine or a submarine or a vehicle on land. You kind of like build it out of these bricks, and then you kind of raise your friends and you participate in all these mission setups. You explore planets, and then the other game is a party game where you are basically four players that are playing together either locally or online, and we do cross-platform. And it's about four bandits that are basically just beating each other up, to get the most loot out of a level, or yeah. I don't know, like the summary of that game is so crazy, but the summary is that you're playing four bandits that are beating each other up, and it's about getting the most points in roughly 5 to 6 mini games, and then that repetition kind of goes over and over again with different kind of modifiers each time.
What was the point with both of these games when you knew that it was a hit? Which metric did you use? Or, when was that? Do you remember that day when you felt like, shit, this is actually working?
I would put it like this. First of all, I was not a part of the first game that really made the hit. I'll make that clear. So Trailmakers had been in the mix for a very long time, and eventually it just hit, and that was a huge success all of a sudden, and that kind of spun off some of the guys to say, okay, let's try and do something else, but a smaller, different kind of game, and try and hit a different audience and try something new. And off that idea came Rubber Bandits, the game that I'm producing now. Uh, and that game, when I started at Flashball, had an initially good launch, and we see that a lot with games, that they have a good launch, and then it really quiets out very fast, and then you need to think fast and figure out, like, what are we going to do now? What do we learn from all of this? And I got into the point where, okay, the game succeeded in a great launch, and then it was flattening out for too long, and then they said, okay, how do we fix this? So I had three major challenges that I needed to overcome. First of all, we had a high return rate due to some challenges in the back end. We had some processes that were unclear, and then we had some role descriptions that needed to be clarified a little bit more. And I think that comes back to our conversation that we're about to have. How we actually set up a team for success, and how we actually clarify what is the most important goal right now. Talk about KPIs. The successes that we're looking at is, you can have a game that has a play session of 20 minutes, and that can be a success. And you can have a game that needs 18 or 30 hours. We see that on Trailmakers. It has an enormously long play session. But with Rubber Bandits, it's completely opposite. We have maybe shorter game sessions. They don't come back that often. Is that good or bad for the business? That's where, like, as a developer team, you have to, connect yourself really well with the business, because what is it that the business is really looking for? The longer players are staying, the more they cost, because we are having server costs and so on. But on the other hand, we can make more money out of players if we're selling downloadable contents, what we call DLC, right? So for me, the success rate was when we had processes where we could deliver at a pace that felt like a good cadence, so we could actually go out and test our hypotheses. That's a little bit more, it's harder to quantify. But the other thing that we were really working on as a KPI was the return rate. And then of course, like our retention rates that we really wanted to boom a little bit more. And we saw that spring from, maybe 30 to 60 games a day to right now up sometimes around 10,000 a day. So obviously, like in the past 10 months, we really, switched the button, what do you call it, flip the plate a little bit around and got it working. So I think we can talk a little bit about like how we did that and go into a little bit in details.
Yeah, and before we jump into that, you're starting a little bit, high level. Are there similarities between, some of these extraordinary teams in film that you worked with, but also then, teams in games and also other software? It's I know it's a tough question, but I mean, are there some, let's say, maybe cultural traits or around kind of like, similarities between the people work? I mean, if you would have to give a speech on, okay, these are like the similarities I've been seeing, the success patterns you've been seeing across, these companies.
Yeah, there definitely are. I think when you're working in film and in games, typically, like I actually made a note that I wanted to talk about that. We're working with people that are very passionate, no matter what, because it's creative industry, and that obviously means that you need to treat people the way that they want to be treated, so you get the best out of them. I think that's pretty clear, and the way I do that is by finding the champions that really has the vision that other people can go around, and I think that's something that we really do a lot. We appoint somebody, not by pointing at them directly, but by knowing that these are the champions and we need to empower them. And I think what we have to understand is also, for instance, with programmers, for instance, a lot of them can work in industries that are probably a lot more lucrative than just being programmers in games. And I think as leaders, we have to recognize that they're here because of passion. That means that we have a responsibility to give them work that is both interesting and fun for them to do. And I think that goes both for film and games. They don't work here because this is where they make the most money. They work here because they love what they do. And I think that's definitely a big takeaway for both artists and programmers, I believe.
Cool. So let's move a little bit more into. Which end would you like to? You said that the success of the game you've been working on producing. You said there was a couple of takeaways there that you wanted to share. I mean, maybe we start on that end.
Absolutely. Like I think we can start in a place. When you go into a game production, when you go into a game company, a completely new producer, there's several ways you can do it, and I think I spent some time obviously watching some of the Favro podcasts and really liked the ones with Nicola Tora and Joe Nichols. I think they both had good points about how to drive culture and how to drive processes, and I think like this conversation could probably be a bit of a mix between both of them. When I started at Flashbulb, the first thing as a leader that you identify is there trust in the company? Do the people actually believe that the ones who are leading the company knows the direction that they're going, and do they trust that they're in good hands? And that really opened up an opportunity for me, because if you're in a company where there's no trust, the second that you take people out from their chair and you take them into an office and you have a conversation with them, that might spike nervousness in a company where there's no trust. But if you're a company with trust, they're going to be like, okay, he's actually out there figuring out like, what do we all think, as an opinion, and how can he get the best out of us? And I did that with the entire company. At that point, we were about 40 people, and I took them just one-to-one, had a conversation. What do you think is good and what do you think is bad? And that out of that conversation, we can create a process or have a conversation where people have ownership, because you can say, this is what, it's been heard. I'm unbiased because I haven't been here before. So also like creating that kind of, creating that space for people to be open, because they know that I can't do any damage to what's already there. I'm not here to fire anybody, just here to listen. And that really gave as soon as I recognized that there was trust in the company, it made the opportunity to create a process where they could also own it. And if we go back to that, then I would say there was 3 major things that I wanted to do. It was figure out, why is the delivery not happening fast enough? Like, how do we decentralize decision making from the product owner down to the team? And how do we get rid of some of the return rates? That was like a thing that we were dealing with a lot, and I think that's quite common when you sell a lot of copies in China. It's everybody talking about the great Chinese firewall. Like it's really hard to sell games because getting data out and understanding that data is really hard. So that was the second one, and then talking a little bit about decentralizing decision making was the last one, because the product owner had built the game for a while. And in this company, the way that we do games is that we take a little core team, and then they go to the side, and then they make a game for a little while, and then they come back with some ideation, and then we start building on that. But they have to create the space, and if we have to create the space for the person to go over and do that, we have to first decentralize all the decision making, so the team is not left behind. And that's something that really, as soon as people are aware that they can make decisions on their own and they're not getting told off for it, or that we actually encourage that, you create a creative space that really allows people to be, hear all the insane ideas that we have. And if you ever play Raw Bandits, you will see that there's some pretty strange things going on, right? so I think like creating that space. But
I have to ask you something around that, because this is almost like the eternal question within game development. So I think a lot of companies right now are moving towards more decentralized decision planning and decision making process. I mean, this is kind of where we come into the picture. But one challenge is, of course, always that you are making a creative product. And there's typically some senior people, if it's a founder on the creative side, or or art director, creative director, etc. It's like you are going to have senior people that ultimately needs to be ultimate tastemakers in a sense. So your product doesn't become a Frankenstein of what 5 different people thought were their best idea. And the balance between that and the decentralized decision making, I find that this is one of the hardest things for a lot of game developers to figure out actually how to do it in a good way. What has been your approach?
When you're working with creative people, there's always a lot of opinions, and first of all, you have to emphasize that everybody can be heard, but not everybody can get their way. So we are appointing people that are decision makers. What I usually try to say is that, if we can talk about like an example of how I implement the process at Flashbulb. First of all, like we work on a very loose set of rules, but the few rules there are, we're quite hard on. So I want to have, we do drive the Scrum process, but everything that happens in between Monday and Friday after 2 weeks, it's up to the team to figure out. And I think like if you draw up, a playing field, and give people, the opportunity to be creative within that, that's how you create the ownership. I agree. If you just say like go out and find your own processes, they're gonna have 10 processes at the end of the day. So I think it's finding the balance between drawing up the playing field, and I can actually give you a couple of examples of how we've made this work. We were sitting with Raw Bandits and wanted to create retention drivers. And some of the retention drivers we know from other games and competitors and experience also is creating customization for characters, as an example, or leveling up systems, or daily missions. All these things are things that will make people come back, play longer, or invest more money in a game. And what we did was we went to our marketing department, we went to the backend and the data engineers, and we said like, okay, they told us we need to make a game that retains people longer. And then we said, okay, that's the KPI that we're going to tell to the production team. We have to make a KPI that does this. We don't want to go over, I think it was 25 minutes of play session. So create something where you can enjoy this meta game loop outside of that. But more than that, we actually didn't tell them. So we drew up like, this is what we want to succeed in from a business and a marketing point of view, but we also allow you guys to be creative within that field. And then we kind of like, there are different ways of driving Scrum processes, but the way that we do it, we have 2 methods, right? The one is either we focus on one feature and we take a month and then we build that feature in that month. It means that we come up with ideation, we do an alpha, a beta, a polish, and a release state, and then we just release it and then we see how it goes. That happens all in 1 month. Or we take several features and we do maybe something like 2.5 to 3 months, and then we lift maybe 4 or 5 features, and then we say like, okay, the first 2 weeks we're gonna just agree, let's have a discovery phase where we say like after, and then we make the, everybody who's ever worked with Scrum will know about the definition of done, but if you haven't, the goal is to say this is what we're going to build, and at the end you review it and say, did we actually manage to do this? And I think like creating that safety for people that, you're saying that like the question was, if how do we create, like the ownership, or how do we allow people to feel creative, without putting them into a bucket and saying it's waterfall and now you're just going to do this. And I think if you constantly just say like, okay, this is the playing field, and then the next 2 weeks are this playing field, then you're kind of like agreeing all the time, and you're kind of lifting the project, together. More as if I just said, okay, we just sat in a room, we can see that we need a retention driver. The creative director says it has to be customization. You're going to have to deliver this in 3 months. Do it. That would never work. And that's also why you see people that come up with these ideas where they draw up a roadmap, and then they say like, okay, in 6 months we have customization. That can usually take a year, because it's not, you have to lift it together as a team, and it has to mature also. Like we talk a lot about maturity. Maturity happens both within the team. For us, it's like we put something into an alpha state that can be 1 sprint, lift customization to an alpha sprint. That's the definition of done. If you're working on something that's not that, don't work on it unless you have done this part first. And for us, going with that is that every time we come to at the end of a sprint, we also know that we are agreeing that this is what we want to do, and people have the opportunity also say, this is not what I thought it would look like. Okay, well then let's talk about like, what did you think it was going to look like? Now we have something to talk about, instead of going with this, okay, in 6 months we're going to talk about this, and then it's gonna magically turn out to be a good customization feature, and that's not going to give people ownership. And I think talking about giving people ownership also goes the other way. People want ownership, but I don't actually think that most people want too much ownership either. They want to feel heard, they want to feel involved, but the second that they stand with the ball in their hand and you just say like, okay, well, go play, that's not always making people feel super comfortable either. So I think like you're right. It's about finding the balance, and I think that's how we do it. Basically lifting, like a little bit at a time, but making sure that we all the time agree on what is the next step, and then we have 4 fixed steps. We have an alpha, a beta, a polish, and a release stage, and that's it. Then we usually say now is enough.
How has this been hard? I mean, do you find it's more challenging to get this to work with more junior talent that you recruited, or do you find it more challenging with senior talent that's been around in the industry for a while?
It's a good question. I think we began as a relatively senior team. Like I don't think that we maybe had 2 people in our team out of 14 developers that were probably less than 2 years of experience. The rest of us were maybe 8 to 10 years plus. And I think that does mean that sometimes junior artists, listen more than they actually talk, which is all, like that's the nice way of saying, there's also a lot of things that people can learn. But I would say, as soon as we also try to onboard them like juniors quite fast, and just we have a lot of play sessions with in-house. And today we had a new programmer starting, and he said like, I have a couple of ideas, and like we really emphasize that people should just spread those ideas. And I said, I'm not gonna start a play session. I mean, you're new today, so I'm gonna ask our game designer to help you start a play session. But if you have ideas, ask 4 people to play with you, and talk it through, like with those guys, and just see if they like the idea. And if they like the idea, more people will talk about it, and you can talk with the product owner. He's sitting right next to you and probably in the play session. So like I think we create the ownership, but again, it's by spiking ideas. And as I said, I don't think that our team is I don't think that there's a massive difference between that, because we still emphasize what the final goal is, and as long as we all feel like we're delivering on the final goal, it's okay that people are junior, as long as we have a the I want to say like the pillars of our game development is for marketing, business, and production. Those are the things that are going to make it work. And as long as we can say like, we would really love this to happen at this time because it hits this amount of people, we're going to aim to make this amount of money. If people can work under that and understand that, then it doesn't matter if they're junior or senior. Sometimes they need help to repeat that.
I think this is I think it's interesting what you're saying, and you mentioned before the podcast I did with Joe Nichols, and he once said that his team is kind of like it's old dogs doing new tricks. And one of the things which is good with people with some experience is that if you get the right people with experience, is that you can have a very clear idea of what do we want this company to be, and also what not to be, because most people have probably experienced both good things and bad things previously in their career. So and then like that creates, I would say, kind of like a gravity on what it is that you want to do, that the new ones get sucked into. So they onboarding in many ways will be easier because there's this strong culture to be absorbed into it. So with that said, let's talk a bit more about culture. I mean, how deliberate have you been around culture?
I'd say I spent quite a lot of time, like with the CEO and the COO Ole, who's also the previous owner of the company before they sold, talking about people and who do we think have the good ideas and who needs to sit next to who, and like that kind of low level conversation really also spikes just how we manage to make people talk with each other. And it sounds weird, but we are small teams, but we're a medium-sized company. I would say, I think we're turning up to be 45 now, and I think the way that we inspire culture is having as much autonomy as possible. Even for the juniors, we make sure that we never waterfall them. We never tell them this is the feature, go do it. That's that is how a junior can have a relevant conversation with a senior. And if you can make that, you really get the culture right, because everybody feels this psychological safety that it's also okay, that I just asked a stupid question. I didn't know it was stupid. I didn't intend to ask a stupid question. And you with more senior experience are just going to be like, yeah, like this is how, and I can also show you this over here. If you feel that, and you can feel that passion, where they really try to teach each other things, then you're creating a culture of learning. And I think that's really what we also try to do a lot. And it's also fun, like talking about that modern day leadership. I mean, we're talking about getting interns, but today some interns are paid as much as a junior because they bring so much value from educations. I mean, we're obviously in Scandinavia where educations is quite good as well, I would say. And sometimes you can get like, what could be like a business analyst or data analysis that comes straight out of uni that are just exactly what you need, and they're interns, and you're like, okay, maybe we're actually learning from you more than you more than you're part of the more than you are learning from us. And I think that's something that we should just put more emphasis on. And I think creating a culture of learning is actually everything I stand for, and I think I'm also a product of it, because I educated myself 2 times since I finished my school or my first education. So for me, as I started out with the degree in art and studied MBA on the side, and I don't think that's ever going to be a point in my life where I'm going to not be studying something. And I oftentimes go to the university where I graduated, and I teach for maybe a week or two because I feel like it's a great place. And it's also a good place to recruit. So there's a lot of benefits. I think a lot of people are doing that, so I'm not afraid to say that.
Yeah. That's a very smart recruitment tactic.
And it's also good because you don't want to get people in that has a different idea of what your company is doing, right? You want them to understand what it is that they're getting into. So it's also good for them. It's not only beneficial for us. They can easily spot if we're the right company for them by me presenting something or teaching them a way of doing things. If they really don't like it, there's no point in starting at Flashbill, because that's how we do it. And I think when you go and do those things, I always said to them, the more if you educated yourself in the 50s or in the 60s, you were, or in the 30s, you were probably going to work with that for the rest of your life. If you educate yourself today, you're going to work with something different in 5 to 10 years. I think that everybody, that are educated now and in the last 10 years will have to educate themselves, 3-4 times throughout their entire career. And I always said to them, if you think about it, like if you go to the doctor, and the doctor is 70 years old, and he said, I haven't studied a single book since I finished my degree in the 80s. Would you really want that guy to stick a needle in your arm? I think obviously you have to renew your knowledge, and you have to understand, different approaches. And I think, so I try a lot to, emphasize a learning culture and a teaching culture. That's the same thing as, I have juniors that are presenting features just as much as I have seniors that are presenting features, because they might as well learn how to present the feature from the beginning, and they might as well, we also might as well have to learn from their ideas. I mean, a lot of them are super young, talented. Like some of them are 22 years old, and they are just delivering, and it's because we're creating a space where they feel safe to do it. So yeah, that's.
So I mean, I need to ask you a final question. I mean, last time we were talking, you kind of gave me a bit of a cliffhanger. You said, hey, I would like to, share a bit on, how we made, Favro kind of like fit, how you work. But we never finished that. We never did that conversation. So I mean, I don't want to take too much time here today with that. But if you could just give a few ideas on, because I think, I mean, one of the things that we are evangelizing a lot is that in a world where work is at least to some extent hybrid. Obviously, it's been quite accelerated by COVID. Um, what happens online is kind of like the main the main workplace. It used to be like the physical office was like the main workplace, but what happens online is very important. And then the tools that you use are going to impact your culture quite a bit. And therefore I'm just curious to kind of getting your 3-minute take on just some of the things that you've done.
Yeah. So the first thing that we did was, I mean, we work with Favro as a main tool on both productions, but the both productions are using them differently, and I think that's really up to for me. We have a retrospective on my team every second week, and the point is, we sit down, we talk about the process I set the stage, but they're allowed to do whatever they want within those within that, what do you call, the stage light or whatever you can say. And Favro is just easy for us to work with because we have simple rules and it's a simple tool. It's I onboarded one today and I could onboard him in 1 hour, and he has a it's okay, that's probably jinxing it, but I would guarantee that he would know how to open up and find his first task already from that. And for me, somebody, when you're in a indie developer, company, that's really important that it's just super fast to onboard people, and that everybody around you also understand it really fast. And that's what we really got from that. I used to work with Jira, and that's completely the opposite. So when we started working with Favro, it was a different kind of approach. We work completely Scrum wise. We have a product backlog on the left side. We have a sprint backlog on the right side, and we kind of just have what the list in the left side, and then we have like a Kanban board on the right. It's very simple like that. We have one rule that I really emphasize a lot. We never assign more than one person to a task. And it's because we work with this kind of responsibility environment where there cannot be two people assigned to a task. There can only be, if a task takes more than two people, then divide it into two. And then every person has the, the responsibility to make sure that that task goes from, start to in progress to QA to done. And then eventually at the end of the sprint, I throw it into the archived when we are sitting in a meeting and saying like, this is it, are we good? And then we drop it all and then we start over and we empty out the sprint every time. And doing that with Favro is like, there's nothing compared. That I'm just gonna applaud you a little bit, because that is actually a feature I really like. And then obviously, like I said to you last time when we spoke, I really love that guy, Dovidas. He's just like all the time, and you're like, we actually have two Dovidases. They must be working a lot, because I'm like talking to them all the time, and they're so nice. So yeah, I don't know. Did that answer your question?
No, but that's great, and I think from our perspective, most tool vendors come from the perspective of making tools, right? It's natural. But in our case, we come from a little bit of a different approach. Most of us are former game developers or have some kind of connection in the game industry, and we're coming more from the people perspective. Like, okay, how would you like to work? And once you figure that out, what would that look like if you design a tool? And I mean, this was the whole origin of why we created this in the first place. And so maybe there will be a podcast with me, where I talk about how we built our culture.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. I mean, I think
because it's as a tool vendor, you're always a little bit on the sideline. You're the hero of the story is always the one who makes the thing that becomes a success, right? So like in your case, you're making great games that becomes a big success. So you're the hero. And we're a little bit more, the kind of the background. But
that's very kind.
I mean, one of the things that makes humans are our ability to make tools. So, I also, I'm proud, being a tool maker, because again, I think it's something very fundamentally human to be tool makers.
That's so nice and simply put, right? I mean, but it is what it is. I think, it delivered on the promise of, being easy to open up and just immediately implement. And for me, coming from the outside, coming from a much more different software, they overdo. Like, we don't need like all these millions of features. We need this, and that's it. So good on you.
Well, thank you so much for a really good conversation. And as I said, we are on season 3 now, and we're already starting to have some returning guests. So hopefully, in a future season, I can invite you back and we can talk about some of the more recent, things that's been happening. That would be great.
Absolutely. I mean, we have some very exciting stuff happening right now, and it's like one of those things where I was like, "Can I talk about it today?" And I think it's a little bit too early. So
no, we get back to it.
Mid next year would be nice, and then we'll see if we actually succeeded, if our processes were working.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much.
Take care. See you.
All right. Thank you, and thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, you know what to do. Share it in your social media so more people can take part and learn. And one more thing, check out Favro Academy on favro.com for many more learnings. Thanks for tuning in.